Hmm.
Welcome back to Data Driven Recruiting. My name is Sophia, and I'm joined by my co-host Tigran. Hi,
Hey,
Tigran.
hey, Sophia. So, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, today it's an interesting topic, which is using technical assessment at the top of the funnel in the recruiting.
Yeah, this is something we talk about a lot, but there is some misunderstanding, some debates and discussions around it. So, I'm excited to kick it off and see where it goes.
Yeah. So the general idea here is, in a lot of the recruiting process, whether technical or non-technical, people start with reviewing the resumes that they receive. Because a resume is like part of the norm. Like when you apply, you submit a resume. And then kind of making a decision based on the resume as the first screening process. At Code Signal, we talk about how it's better to actually start with a skill, because what you're trying to do with the resume review is trying to see whether there is a fit, there is they meet the requirements, especially when it comes to the skills and stuff. So actually measuring skill is better than looking at the resume. But I think they're interesting, when you're trying to implement this in real life, there are, it's kind of a daunting because it's a changing the norm. And from the recruiter's point of view and also from the candidate's point of view. So how do you go about actually implementing it in real life?
Yeah, I think the first thing to consider is that we're not in an ideal world, right? We're far from an ideal world. Yes, ideally you would carefully look at everybody's resume and then identify some things that you could ask questions about and connect with everybody on the phone, understand them as humans, and then put everybody through an assessment still so that you can collect all the data points of the human interaction, have the review of fit based on resume, have skill assessment data. But all of that in a world where even a small startup gets thousands of applicants is just practically impossible. So you have to make sacrifices. The question is, where can and should you make sacrifices, and where you are just absolutely not allowed to make sacrifices?
Or more trade-offs.
Yeah, or
where do we want to focus if we have to choose our process?
Yeah, so one thing, for example, that comes up a lot is, what if the candidate is not actually fit, right? This happens quite often, is if you give everybody at the top of the funnel, everybody who applies an assessment, and then after they complete the assessment and they do well, there was some basic requirements, such as hey, you have to be based in this specific country to apply for this job, and they still applied. Well, in my opinion, I think it shouldn't be on the recruiting team, on sourcers and recruiters reviewing applications, to identify that you didn't satisfy a very basic requirement. And on the flip side, every job description should very clearly state in the description that hey, there are very core requirements.
Yeah, what are the deal breakers, and make it very transparent from the beginning.
Yeah, okay. And if the candidate didn't take enough care to actually read it and understand it and not apply, right? Because that's the other side, that some candidates do just randomly submit applications. I think the company shouldn't be the one responsible for having to read through thousands of resumes to say, oh, okay, we're not going to give you an assessment because you don't satisfy this basic requirement.
Right. Yeah. And I as you mentioned with the, job aggregating sites and so on, it's really easy to just submit an application to companies. What that means is, the volume that each job will get, nobody can humanly go through every single one and spend, enough sufficient time to do so. So then, is it going to be, we need to have a more scalable solution. And it's better to find it out later than earlier. But
and just a note on that, right? This is a whole other topic that we can talk about at some other time, but that sort of brings you back to the future of job descriptions, of how it shouldn't just be random free-form text, right? Because that's what it is right now. It's a random free-form text where someone might, not thinking about this scenario, put that very core requirement at the very bottom as oh, by the way, you have to satisfy this very key requirements to even be considered for the job, and you'll be instantly disqualified. You can imagine that in the future, job descriptions would be a lot smarter about like, hey, there is this thing in this job description, even if it's not at the very top, that doesn't seem to quite be a match, and it's a core requirement that will fail you right away. So don't even bother applying, right? Because there's no chance whatsoever.
All right. So one of the counter argument to having assessment at the very top of the funnel is candidate experience. So some might argue that, you know, when you apply for a job and the first thing you get from the company is an invitation to a test, like this could feel a little cold or like too business like, or maybe it's too much. Like I want to actually get to know who you are as a company and people before I commit my time to take a test. So what's your point of view on that one?
Yep, absolutely. It's a good question. It's a good concern because yes, in an ideal world, every candidate that's interested in your company or has some high level interest would go through a conversation with someone who works there, who can tell them more about the company, get them excited, and then move them forward to skill assessment. But the hard reality is that for every job, especially if it's somewhat of a popular company, you get thousands and thousands of applicants. And with thousands of applicants, even large companies only have small sourcing and recruiting teams who can never cope up with talking to everyone. But then what happens is companies get fixated on this idea is like, hey, we have to deliver a great candidate experience. So let's just reject everybody whose resume doesn't look good and filter it down to like 4% or 5% of applicants and then just talk to those. Well, again, it's a trade off. If you're really worried about losing that 4 or 5% whose resume really looks good, you can at least give everybody else a chance by having those take the assessment because everybody will take an assessment over a rejection letter. And I think the fact that they just kind of keep thinking about the candidate experience piece on optimizing for that, they forget that like it's the worst candidate experience to apply and be told, nope, you're not qualified for this job. Where
and not even having the chance to prove themselves, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? Like you're just told, and most of the time there's no feedback either, right? It just says, thanks for applying. There are too many people applying, so bye. We're not interested.
Yeah, or not at all. I know some companies, because there is so much volume, they don't even like tell them. It just like goes into the black hole and then you just don't hear. And that's not a great candidate experience.
Yeah. And the right approach is to be transparent about it too, right? Because like some candidates don't think about that. Some candidates think they're one of the 10 applying. So you should be talking to them. But being transparent in your messaging is like within a week, we get not hundreds, but we get thousands of applicants. So the choices are we most likely will send you a rejection letter outright, or we have to find somewhat of a fair and objective way to sort of get the candidate volume to a smaller list of more qualified people who can then have that conversation with us. And I think when you're transparent with candidates understand and appreciate it because it makes sense, right? Like if you get thousands of applicants, you have to have an army to have a conversation with everybody who applies.
Yeah, so I guess the one last question about this idea about using skill assessment at the very top of the funnel instead of resume review or whatever you have currently. How do you kind of because I mean the whole idea is there's too many candidates to review manually, so you need to bring it down to the top of the top people, and so how do you kind of set the threshold in who passes the technical screening portion of the stage? Is it going to be kind of a similar like 4 or 5% of everyone who applied, or like how do you go about finding the right balance in terms of who moves to the next?
Yeah. Well, ideally, your threshold should be as low as you can afford it to be, in the sense that you want to give as many people a chance as possible to sort of move forward with the process. And so you're not maybe disqualifying someone who was like right on the edge. They could have done it. Maybe they weren't at their best when they were taking the test. So ideally, you put it as low as possible, but then it's again a trade-off, right? On the one hand, you want to put the threshold high enough where you're not spending unnecessary time on interviews only then to find out this person is not qualified. On the other hand, again, if you put the threshold too low, you're going to have way too many candidates clearing that. And again, you're back where you started, where you just cannot afford to have those many conversations. So you want to look at it from both those two sides, right? So like, what's our bar, or like what's our qualifying criteria? Where should, based on that, our threshold be on the scores? And then on the flip side, how many candidates can we afford, given our size of our team, our interview resources, how many candidates can we afford to talk to? And then I guess there is a third element to it, which is what matters the most to us, because skill assessment obviously is only one element of it. There is a lot of argument that like personality in certain jobs, right? Personality or approach or like work ethic or some of those elements could play an even bigger role than your current skill level. So at the end of the day, skill assessment and your level of ability is one element. It's more important for some jobs and less important for other jobs. So you have to keep that in mind, right? Like if skill assessment is an absolute key requirement, this is a job where it's like, if you don't have this level of skill, you're just going to completely fail, then yes, absolutely set that threshold. If it's something where it's like, okay, well, these skills could pretty much be picked up on the job if you have this base level.
And also the internal resources to make sure that they can come in and learn.
Exactly, right? If you have a very robust training program, again, that makes the argument for like putting a lower threshold on that qualification. Or an approach that I've seen that work well with a bunch of our clients is having 3 different layers where there is like a red zone, a yellow zone, and a green zone, where if you score way too low, then it's just a no-go because you're not qualified at all. If you're in that yellow zone, then either there is a secondary process that sort of gathers more data, or a human review of the assessment where you can manually check what happened, look at replays, look at some more manual data to make a more human judgment. And then there's a green zone where if you've scored off the charts, you just instantly move through the fast track process.
Yeah, I like that approach of kind of a tiered, and then having different processes for based on the performance on the results. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for your time today and insights about how to and why we should put assessment at the top of the funnel. Thanks for everyone for listening in. For more tips and insights on data-driven recruiting, please visit ddr.codesignal.com. We'll see you next time.